So our next speaker is Benjamin Young, a web digital publishing and open source advocate here today to speak about publishing and the World Wide Web. Benjamin is a solutions architect at John Wiley & Sons, where he works on the Web Annotation Working Group and Digital Publishing Interest Group at W3C. He's currently exploring the edges of a re-decentralized web using annotation, distributed identity, and offline-friendly web apps and extensions. Please welcome Benjamin.
Hi, everybody. Thanks for coming. This hopefully will not be the history lesson that you were looking forward to so you could take that nap. So apologies if you were here for a nap. Feel free to take one. I'm not going to stop you. So yeah, Web History 101. There's a document in the corner that we'll be revisiting later. If I were giving out bonus points for knowing about that already. This is me. I work for SVIA, which many of you already know, and I work at Wiley. I'm Big Blue Hat online, much easier to find than Benjamin Young, which is apparently in the top 100 most common names on the planet. So the web got its start a long time ago. We're going to start with a reading list. If you're curious about how it started and the interesting anecdotes about CERN and Tim's computer, the one server that ran the whole thing for a while, this is a fabulous book that he co-wrote with someone. His content, their writing, you know how that works. And then there's several links in here, looks like I missed one, that go to history pages from the W3C or from Tim that describe how it all happened. So if you're really curious about the interesting individuals involved in the process, these are great places to start. But this is the overview of the history. Pre-web, there were people thinking about hypermedia and the ability to click around and move, not like you do in a book, maybe like you do in a choose your own adventure sort of thing. Vannevar Bush's As We May Think article, which is available online, hence the hyperlink, from the Atlantic Monthly in 1945, which is not when they put it online, early by a couple months. It outlines this beautiful future world where we can access information easily and move from page to page and find all the content that we needed to find. Some days I feel like that's happened, some days I don't. Douglas Engelbart, another 15 years later, if my math is working, did the mother of all demos, where he demoed this thing called Online Systems and his newly invented mouse. This is how long ago that was, which originally looked like a block of wood with like a pie cutter in it. And anyway, it only went sideways initially and then kept going. But he also showed hyperlinking and cross-referencing and jumping around. It's all available online. You can watch the black and white graininess, which is pretty fabulous. And then also that year, Ted Nelson coined the word hypertext. How many of you know that word, or hypermedia, which I've already said? Yeah, right room, we're good. That hyperlink doesn't go to the actual document because you have to pay for it. I think it's like $8 from ACM. But that's the big document in which he talks about a file structure and a docuverse that you can like cross-reference and jump around. And this is 1960, so he's talking about a very webby sort of thing, a good 20 years before it starts happening. So behold the web, 1980. I was born in 1980. It's a good chunk of years. I remember them well. Tim Berners-Lee was at CERN writing notebook programs. So think Evernote-ish kind of things, where you, not nearly that graphical though, think something more like that. We'll come back to that slide in a second. Where he was recording like trees of information about the people at CERN and giving them a way to organize their documentation, just like you may do on GitHub or Evernote or anything like that. And it was out of this project that had a very complicated name, Inquire Within Upon Everything, which is how that web history book starts out, with him doing this and exploring that and what he learned from that, and then learned from hypertext conferences, which were running in the 80s. I had no idea. And then out of that came this proposal in 1989, so he was at it for kind of a while. And then created Information Management or Proposal, which is the document that was in the corner that we'll take a look at in a bit. And then from that became a program called World Wide Web, all one word. That's not camel case, that's Studley caps, I think, right? I don't know. There's kebab case and camel case. It's important information, which was the browser. So the World Wide Web was the first World Wide Web browser when it wasn't worldwide and it was just on Tim's desk. And Robert helped him at CERN, and they moved on to a second proposal that got practical. The first one was vague but exciting. That's what his boss said anyway. So this is the World Wide Web. Not as pretty as we know it. This is the line mode reader because part of his audience were using green screen terminals connected to typically mainframes. And what he was really inventing was using the internet, which was quite new at the time, for jumping around between servers and moving, not always just dialing into one box and having just that access, but going from that box to the next box and the next box and not really caring anymore what box it was on, and doing that from contextual links. So it's prettier in this version, which is not quite contemporary with the first one, but pretty close. This runs on a next box, or, well, I think it still runs, actually, at the Computer Science Museum in San Francisco, or Mountain View. Obviously more graphical. We even have some 3D something going on in there, which is fascinating. But this is what Steve Jobs was doing, was building this operating system because he'd left Apple. And so these are the newfangled toys in the computing world. And Tim wrote in Objective-C, if anybody here write in Objective-C doing Apple apps or anything? Don't bother. He wrote the first web browser in that for the Next. And Next is where we got that wonderful language. This is Tim, and he's sitting at what it probably looked like first, black and white, Next computer that he was running that on. And also, I will say Tim throughout this. That's Tim. Sir Tim to his friends. The web begat a lot of companies and conferences like immediately. As soon as more people found out about it, it started solving problems for CERN, but then as it grew, because anyone could make it grow through creating more pages, it got more and more interest, and eventually, by 1994, we have the W3C, which is where Liam, hi Liam, works, and I collaborate on web publication documents and stuff like that. But there were already, predating all this, there were already conferences on hypertext, which still boggles my mind. And then about 5 years later, there are conferences about the World Wide Web, and quite large ones. There were several browsers spun out, Urwise, Viola, Mosaic. Mosaic later becomes Netscape, then AOL buys Netscape, and we don't know about Netscape anymore. Not sure why that happened. Mozilla was born out of Netscape. Mozilla makes Firefox. It's all this like family history, and I'm sure there'd be a wonderful chart somewhere that shows that. There is a place online that keeps browser archives where you can like download the binaries, eVolt or something. I'm seeing some head nods. Something like eVolt browser history, if you look that up. It's like a massive list of things you've never heard of that some of them were around for just a few months, sometimes days maybe, but some of them got some traction like Mosaic. So then we're here in the present. So we've got all this history. Tim made this thing. People started using it. It's more and more places. We all get these AOL free disks, right? We get online. We're browsing what we think is the web. It gets better and better, and then we start going back to AOL disks where we only dial into a thing called Facebook, and we only read that data, right? So we've got these social networks that don't like hyperlinks because they do exactly what Tim meant them to do, which is take you other places besides Facebook. Instagram, if you've ever typed in a URL, it goes no place, right? They have to like highlight it, copy it, go to a different thing. Some of these people on the web don't like the web, which is sad. It's ad ridden. I forget this. I use somebody else's browser without ad block or a VPN, and it's a scary place. I don't know how you use it. It's sad. Fake news, I'm going to skip that one. Just because. Privacy loss. Tim's been talking a lot about this one for the last year. We're all connected to a public Wi-Fi right now. Do some homework on that. I'm not going to talk about that one either, but it's worth digging into. This is one I care about a lot, actually, is the next one. The body script body thing. How many of you write HTML or JavaScript apps? Have you seen this? And like guides about how to build web apps, right? That's not a web page. Yeah.
I know a major metadata distributor who shall remain nameless, which
Yeah, this is how the kids are doing it. Please educate them. Please help them. That's not a document. That's just a runtime for a thing that's meaningless, right? Because what does that do? Anybody have a guess? It doesn't do anything. I mean, right now it doesn't point to any JavaScript. But if it did, it's whatever that JavaScript does, and it's a black box. So, and et cetera. You can fill in that in. But let's back up. There's this document. Something happened to my pretty swooshies. Oh well. This is the proposal that Tim did in 1989. And it started with this wonderful chart. And quote, but this chart outlines all the pieces of software that they were using at CERN. And there's circles and arrows about what Tim's doing, and smack in the middle is the mesh proposal, which was just a working title. And it points to its relationship within CERN to all of these different hierarchies or things like IBM Group Talk. I worked for IBM briefly and did all kinds of internal research to find out what that was. It was 3 things in the course of IBM's history, and I couldn't find enough information on that first version to know what it was. It was called like the first groupware. I think it was maybe a mailing list server. I don't know, but most of these things are gone. They're like in history lessons, right? Like this one. But the web is like now subsumed all of that, and that's precisely what this first proposal about it was in 1989. It discusses the problem of loss of information. Anybody have this problem? Yeah? About complex evolving systems, and derives a solution based on distributed hypertext. So hypertext was a thing, as I've said too many times already, with conferences that people were using. They're talking about HyperCard and these new things called CD-ROMs. And you were doing these multimedia hypertext experiences where you bounced around a CD-ROM. It's amazing. Then what happened was Tim stuck the word distributed in front of it and started jumping across servers. And that's when the world blew up. Ouch. Not sure where the black box came from, sorry. Not my laptop. Firstly, it discusses the problem of, yeah, that was the other quote, wasn't it? No. Yeah, so it's focused on CERN initially, but in this quote is the idea of linked information systems. So when you think of hyperlinks, like most people, you're thinking of moving from a page to a page. This document didn't stop there. Initially, Tim's initial idea was thinking of computers moving from thing to thing, and these links talking about more than just other pages, and more than you moving from page A to page 75. You know, it doesn't matter how you catalog them. That you could jump between them, like that's amazing, but then he went farther, and he was talking about real things in the data, using this same graphy, linky thing. So a linked information system. CERN was losing data, using lots of different systems, because they had all kinds of scientists coming, and these people knew their thing, just like happens in our companies, and they wanted to use their thing to organize their notes. It's all fine, whatever, but there was no way to see across all of them or to expose them to each other, and that was increasingly needed. So information was getting lost, including in things Tim built, like Inquire, where it did fine for that department and the people who had access to it, but it couldn't talk about stuff in a different department, and they couldn't talk about that, nor could they see each other's stuff. And this is integral to why the web took off. CERN is a model in miniature for the rest of the world. It was open, it was collaborative, it was multicultural, it was located in lots of different buildings, and yet it was small enough and networked that he could build this model and make it work. So this one still bugs me, and we're only at page 5. The method of storage must not place its own restraints on the information. Does that ever happen to anybody? Like maybe when you are making an ebook and you think, I can't present this information because X, Y, Z, whatever, or this is not spreadsheet data, like, but I'm in a spreadsheet or a Word doc or wherever I'm sadly wandering. And the system we need is like a diagram of circles and arrows where circles point to things, right? So he goes on to talk about this. We can call the circles nodes and the arrows links. So he says that, and we do this, right? Web page, link, web page. But he also meant this to be possible. So human being plays video game. Whatever those identifiers on each side, they might not bring up a web page, or they might bring up a web page if you're browsing about that thing. But they're still actually talking about Benjamin plays Mad Max. If you were in my talk yesterday, you know that. And these are some examples he gave, because he didn't play Mad Max at the time. I don't know if he does now either. But he talks about people being in a family tree graph where someone is the parent of. Or all the way back at my first slide, I had these little like works at Wiley and works for Svea. They're not more complex than that conceptually, that it's really just a sentence structure of a subject, a predicate, and an object, and you're building this graph of things. So let's take a concept break, get really thinky for a minute. There's a term that is sometimes derided, often derided, Liam? Maybe often derided. The semantic web. Do any of you know what that is or have heard about it? How many of you have heard positive things about the semantic web? All right, Liam. Oh, okay, a few more people. Yeah, so the semantic web is really what Tim was talking about in information management or proposals. So he doesn't have any software written here. He's talking about this ability of real things pointing to real things, expressions of graph data on a like multi-node network system across the entire planet. It's a bit nuts. The semantic web conversation that happened in '98, so we're only, 8 years into the actual practical web, maybe 9. Tim begins talking about the semantic web as like, this is really where I wanted this thing to go. It gets called Web 3.0 in 2014 because 2.0 had happened in between. And it gets kind of tangled up with artificial intelligence, like a lot of other things. And it could certainly be the foundation of that. And in Tim's wilder moments, he described this future where it would do that. It would deduce things for you and explain things back to you, which was actually the kind of stuff he wanted Inquire to do even before he was doing the web. And those things are maybe still possible. But in recent days, we've started talking about linked data, which is like Semantic Web Light. It's like the ability to say those graphy terms and to use words, not just words, use URLs and identifiers that universally talk about a thing. So an identifier for me that anywhere on the web is always talking about the actual me, not a web page that talks about me. And to take that even farther so that I could build a graph that says, this is where I work, this is who I know, this is who they know, and then through some mapping, figure out who I know from what company, like LinkedIn does for you, or whoever. A lot of what you hear described as knowledge graphs at big companies is using something like this, some sort of graph-based thinking. These are great reads if you want to understand the bigger vision. So a tree has, oh yes. So from the semantic web, this is what he's thinking, the graphy bits. And then he goes into describing, he doesn't use the word semantic web, by the way, in information management or proposal. He doesn't hardly use the word web, actually. But he does describe all the things that have been tried in information management writ large that have or haven't worked and why they haven't worked. First, he picks on trees and talks about how they're great, but then you've got to always find it in a tree system, and if it doesn't fit there, then it ends up in the general category in Onyx, right? Like it's tree, you got to stick it someplace. So there's this like bucket where everything else goes that doesn't go there. And then if you change the tree, what happens to the whole structure when you want to like move something and all your references break and bad things happen? File systems still do this. Anyone like organizing on a file system? Yeah, me either. So then it goes into keywords, which is a little more hackable, right? It's like the folksonomies and tags and stuff where you can just stick keywords onto things, and if you didn't have limitations of number of keywords, you could maybe categorize everything with keywords. And keywords, for the most part, are kind of graphy, or can be. But they're also like really not fault tolerant. And you and I might use the same keyword to mean something else. And mashing our data together could cause serious problems. So he proposes that hypertext is the solution to this, because it gives you the ability to go from A to 72 and to also describe that relationship between A and 72 as you jump across the web. And you can click through these slides and read all these quotes if you like. So references in this document all being associated to the network address. So this is just the description of a URL or a link that you use all the time. And take you to the thing that it referred to, but then it can also refer to other stuff with just a click of a mouse, which again is not an old thing at this point. Yeah, can you imagine doing that? It's amazing. And the thing that I had to keep remembering when I read this the first time, which was a decade ago, was that none of this existed, right? This ability to jump around was brand new. Like you dialed into a place, sometimes on a really ugly green screen terminal. And just that experience that is in Engelbert's demo when he starts doing stuff like that, or even using a mouse, that was mind-blowing at the time, is easy to forget. CERN had requirements that again made it a good miniature for the future web. It had access needs that were distributed among buildings and among geographic locations. Had heterogeneity. These are all the terms from his document. I liked non-centralization. We mostly say decentralization now, but it didn't have, because it was like a bunch of departments, there was some probably guiding authority making some shot calls, but they had to collaborate in a decentralized or non-centralization fashion. And Tim's original concepts mapped to that, and things that we've built into the web since then, or along the way, like DNS, have removed a lot of that. So when you name things on the web, you have to have a domain name before you can do that, and you rent that thing. So that seems like a bug, right? Because if you quit paying rental, then you can no longer have those names. That's bad. So we're looking into ways with decentralization to name things irrespective of where they're located, or in addition to where they're located, or something blockchainy where it's the same thing, right? But you don't have to always pay monthly to rent them, or yearly rather. And then access to existing data was something he spent a lot of time on. And that really changed the future of what the web became, because he didn't say, this is a whole new system where we're going to put all our stuff, and it's in a new place. And then if everybody uses the new thing, it'll work, which is a lot of what you hear from people selling you software, right? Like, your old pipeline's broken, screw it, like, come over here and we're going to start over. And it sounds so nice, and it never works, right? Or it takes, just way too long. So the web was dumb enough to sit on top of all of that and point to stuff and give you a way to extract it and present it in maybe a dumber fashion, but a thing that had this superpower of like jumping around places. So you could expose databases, you could expose those trees and those keyword maps into this hypertext space and move between them. The private links thing is probably my favorite section. He also says the word annotation in here a couple times. It talks about this ability that none of us still have to like make your own links and keep stuff. Now in this document, he's simply referring to you making your own web pages. But at CERN, you were probably running your own web server and adding to this, or you had direct access to his server and you're storing it on his hard drive because everybody was very trusting there, and they could be. So you're making your own HTML pages about what you know about this department, and you're linking to the people that you've met maybe. It's nothing more complicated than that. What has happened since then is there's this strong desire, since we mostly just stay in our browsers and aren't always publishing out to a web page or a blog. Sometimes we do, but that's like a separate space. That there's the potential that the browser could get smart enough to like take care of its user and let that person annotate and let that person keep stuff. How many of you use the bookmarks in your browser? You still do that? That's awesome. Okay, that's good to know. I thought a lot of people were like, I use Pocket now that Mozilla bought it or whatever. Okay, cool. That's great to know. But how many of you go there to find the thing that you found when you need it versus going to Google to find the thing you found? Yeah? Huh? A couple people? Yeah. The awesome bar is actually pretty awesome because it does bring up search history stuff sometimes, things that you have found. Okay, cool. As a co-editor of the web annotation spec, this one's kind of important to me. And there's a version of a future where you do a bit more than just click a little star and put it in a tree someplace. in your browser. He says this project isn't going to have a whole lot of bells and whistles. We're only going to worry about ASCII text on a 24 by 80 screens, so 24 lines by 80 characters. Yeah, I wish that was our target. Oh, but he did start saying the word hypermedia in this, that in future we could link to documents that were videos or embed them or 3D stuff. So he's not limiting, like, this is the web, it's 24 by 80. He's saying this is our target and it could go who knows where. These were things that he expected would happen at CERN, and these are things that we do with the web all the time. Data analysis, the ability to link into a database. Like, this hadn't been done yet, right? PHP was not a thing. There were no databases exposed as web pages that you could click around at this time. But that's exactly what he describes. For going back to that chart and saying all this craziness that doesn't talk to each other, I want to put a layer on top of that and expose them so they all link to each other. And then the non-requirements are interesting too. He doesn't worry about copyright enforcement or data security, because he doesn't need to, because they all work at the same place. But he points out very accurately that all of this stuff can be layered on top later. So by leaving it out, he actually accelerated past the one well-known contender in this space at the time, which would have been Ted Nelson, who I mentioned earlier. His Xanadu solved all these problems, and it was kind of conceptualized before all this happened. There's a great article called In Praise of Evolvable Systems about Tim's web and Ted's Xanadu, and the comparison between which one made it out the door first and why. Ted's system is technologically better. You can like quote my work and pay me for my quotation when you sell your document. So you sell Liam a viewing of your document and I get a cut of that based on my quotation that he quoted. So it's like, it's all built in and it's all secure and it's all amazing and sometimes hard to get your head around. Whereas Tim's was really dumb. It was like text that turned blue and you like went to these known network locations and that was pretty much it. Like the first version of HTTP was get, like go get me this thing and bring it back and I want to look at it and I'm going to go get something else. There was no post, no put, no delete. It wasn't complicated. But it was, as Clay Shirky says, it was the best worst thing out there. It's not great. It's really stupid. But it was good enough at what it did that we could all build on top of it. And we're still doing that. And we're not going to stop, most likely. So they go from here into specific applications at CERN. What would they build? And this is where his collaborator comes in later to really get down to, here's the software we need to write to make this a success. Personal skills inventory sound like any website you use this week? I am Benjamin Young on LinkedIn, if you want to find me there. Not Big Blue Hat, although you could probably find me there with that name. Project documentation, anyone doing this every day, right? On the web, but not quite on the web, right? We're all using stuff like tucked inside of the web, plus minus links out of it, right? But now we're using whole interfaces built inside of the web. And document retrieval, which of course is what it does natively, but then we're also not just retrieving webby documents, which is what he talks about as well, where you're pulling in things like PDFs, which are not quite webby, right? They kind of have links. But you could be getting videos that have 0 links or whatever. And it allotted for that, and it's strange to think about, but a lot of other systems didn't, right? Well, like even his Inquire system or software we use now that's just note-taking stuff, but you can't drag a video into it and have that sit in line with your text. Well, the web does that, right? You can have an HTML document that does that, but Evernote probably lets you do that now. But most note-taking software doesn't, sometimes deliberately. Yeah, so these are some conferences that he had been to and suggested they go to the next one. He wanted to present this new idea at the 1991, and I believe he did. There's all kinds of great talks that he's recorded online, mostly his notes from them that are wonderfully rambly. And the browsing techniques. Lost in hyperspace was already a phrase. This is PreWeb, right? You're just on a CD-ROM. and you're already lost. Like, how is that even possible? But, we still are stuck with a back and forward button. That's it, right? And how many tabs do you have open today, right? Like, no less than 20 at least. And then I all too frequently tweet about my windows inside of tabs inside of Windows, and like, it's just mind-numbing, and at some point you just have to delete them all. The Onion even did a piece on something about woman closes tab browsing experience and has this like moment of enlightenment, and like she's just so elated and happy, and then finds the restore session button and like is doomed forever because now she's back to that like really complicated space again. So there's still a couple problems to solve. And one of them is this lost in hyperspace feeling, which I'm certain we feel a little more acutely than they did back then. Interconnection or publication. This is still a question, probably especially here, about what we're doing. Are we connecting data like across boundaries, or are we going to like close it up and package it and publish it within boundaries? That's an ongoing discussion. But web technology does give us the way to build on top of proprietary stuff and expose that conditionally, because now we have built some of that security stuff Tim left out. We have built some of those copyright things that Tim left out. So most of the options are quite possible here. So, yeah, this one talks about us. There's also much support from the publishing industry and from libraries whose job it is to organize information. Do you have like roaring support for web publication at your publisher? Oh, you should come work for Wiley. Yeah, it's still a thing that's not quite gelled yet. I was talking to our videographer in the back about broadcasting, right? They didn't care for the internet, maybe still don't, right? As Netflix generates all kinds of its own content now. The web is changing everything. That's not new to anybody. It's 25 years old now. 26 years old, 25 last year. Publishers do what the web does, right? We distribute publication. The web, it's called web publishing. It always has been called web publishing. And we can either be scared of it or we can like adopt it and run fast after making it awesome, maybe on our terms, or at least providing the intelligence of 209 years, or however Wiley is old, and experience, and bringing that into new distribution models on this new medium. But I come from the web to publishing, so I'm happy to say I'm naive. And only way in which sufficient flexibility can be incorporated is to separate the information storage software from the information display software. We don't have this anymore in the web apps that we consume, right? We sort of do, right? Like the browser's still providing the experience of clicking a link and going to a place. But that body script body nastiness that I showed you earlier, that gets rid of a lot of this. By allowing for that flexibility, and that is not a bad thing that we allowed for it, we have given up some of that separation of information storage and information display, and now those come together in a single package, which might be good. There are reasons for the developer or even the publisher to want to own that entire experience, but then there are also reasons like accessibility where it should be separated enough that the person can come up with or be provided some other way to experience the content that is different from how you stored it and sent it to them, because they need to, because they can't get your content any other way. So yes, he's absolutely right. It's amazing, and we don't do it enough. Here's what it looks like. This is the web. Pretty amazing. I really wanted that gradient to put in my slides, but I wasn't sure how he made it. Probably on a green screen someplace, or a next box. So browsers talking to hypertext servers, which then talk to other hypertext servers. This is what REST was meant to do, representational state transfer, where two servers basically browse links and fill out forms to each other. And that's a conference I run you can come to. We'll talk later. And the incentives to make this happen. Separating the information is amazing because it's an important phase in designing this world of how you move across all this, is how when you don't necessarily own the browsing bit, but you do own the data, there's a whole gap of design in here for moving the person around. And we got as far as tabs and kind of stopped. So there's a lot more design to be done for the display program and also for scaling these database server things. Yeah, so exposing existing information was a huge incentive at CERN still. And here's an example of that. I just love his charts, so I put them all in. They all say about the same thing. In this case, okay, this case back here, these are just maybe file systems, I guess? I don't know. They all have that wonderful hash pattern. And then this one, because it's got like a box, table, spreadsheet thing, is a database. So over here, he's browsed to a database, and over there, he's browsed to a file system, just raw HTML. These are the fabulous things he was exposing to the world. UUCP News, super decentralized and overrun awesome tech that got not awesome because of the users on it. Let's not let that happen to the web any more than it already has. Vax Notes, anyone still using Vax Notes? I don't even know what that is. CERN doc, that sounds proprietary to CERN. File systems, that one can die in a fire. I'm so tired of that. Telephone book, I think he means a digital one, but he might not. And Unix manuals, I use those all the time, right? Like man, Python, whatever. They work still. And databases, which are insanely diverse, right? This one's fun. In the news article, he goes through each of these and has like ways they can do it. In news articles, for example, one could use in the text a standard format to reference to another article, or maybe inject emojis, which he left out because they weren't a thing, or make mentions or use hashtags, right? So it's just text that the localized system, or potentially your browser could have, said, oh wow, I know what this reference looks like, right? It's to a religious text, or it's to a person because it has an @ sign in it, or it's to a keyword because it has a hash in it, or it's to a smiley face. That one's the most important in that list. So we lose out if we try to constrain them, as we will exclude systems and hamper the evolution of hypertext in general. So he didn't want to like say, this is just for tree systems, but it's like a new way to browse tree systems, or this is just for databases. And he could have, and it would have been a much smaller project. The other thing he did not constrain, and this is debatably the main reason that it won, he didn't constrain the license of this. So CERN does not get a nickel every time you browse a web page. They maybe should, but they don't. It was not patented, it was not restricted, and now we all built on top of it and will continue to for the foreseeable future in ways that Xanadu and lots of others never saw the light of day, or did briefly, like IBM Group Talk, whatever it was. Because it did the thing and it did it in a proprietary fashion. It couldn't reach out to other people or companies or things. It couldn't link across those things. And even if it could, it still came with all kinds of patents and restrictions and costs and things that hampered it. So Tim's system was really stupid and really free. And from there, we built all kinds of great stuff. But the scary part is we are killing off the bits that make it scale and make it grow. And we need to keep that evolvability in mind, and including licensing, not necessarily of content, but of the things that we build on top of that via open source and open standards. We can raise all the boats to continue to make webby things that will be here in the next 100 years. And maybe there's another web coming, I don't know. But restraining it didn't work then, it's not gonna work now. That's my theory. We should work toward a universal, again, linked information system. He keeps saying this. It's not about just the pages or these constrained little apps like a Facebook thing that does one thing, or, you know, it's huge, right? But it's still inside of itself, navel gazing. So this is linking information across everywhere, and not just information that is encoded in the system, but being able to talk about a book by its ISBN, or being able to talk about a person by probably something besides their social security number. And then taking that next, I hope, into a portable thing that moves beyond the network, which is not something that he touched on. And in conclusion, in his text at least, the aim would be to allow a place to be found for any information or reference which one felt was important, and a way of finding it afterwards. That sums up the whole desire that he had, and I have every freaking day when I sit down at my computer and I still can't do it. All right? We have all kinds of standards that, good ones and bad ones, that do not create this pluggability into a place where you could find and put everything to find it again. It just doesn't work that way. I was super happy about all the bookmark usage because that's about as close as the browser's got, and then they kind of stopped innovating there. There's more to that, right? There's more to the experience of building your own web, maybe on your hard drive somehow, where it doesn't look like saving HTML pages all the time, but where you're creating this internally browsable, graphy information system for yourself that also connects to the web, but it's yours and it's private and you didn't have to publish it on the internet just to read it back. So one thing that's important to me in the stuff that I build is this concept of egocentric architecture, where the person that is creating the data keeps the data, and it starts there and it goes out from them later. Right now, you type in a comment box, and if you don't click save, right, you lose it. That's annoying. But if you save it, it's not on your hard drive, it's not in that device, it goes away from you. And then you gotta find it again if you ever want it. And your browser forgot that you even filled it out. It could at least keep the text for you and say, on this date, you commented this text on this web page, on this topic, and let you find it again. Rant over. The passing of this threshold accelerated by allowing large existing databases. I can't stress this enough, that this was an amazing piece, that he made a system in which you could map all kinds of dead weight and make it look not dead with the new ones. And we need to not forget that as we try and modernize publishing pipelines and deal with old metadata. Like exposing these things to something as organic as the web is not a bad thing and is super liberating for you and your data. The system we need can be combined from various sources. For example, a browser from one source and a database from another. So pick your browser, right? You've probably got 3 of them installed right now. I hope at least 3, because they're not all great. And the databases are from all over the world, right? This is just common now, but it wasn't then, right? Like you would buy from, I don't know who the killer companies were at the day. Most of them are gone. You would buy a mainframe and you would buy a terminal. And that's what it did, right? You dialed into company terminal, into company mainframe, and yay, wow. And the internet was amazing because now you could dial into Joe's hard drive from your hard drive, and that was it, right? Like you used a BBS or something. The web on top of the internet lets you jump all over the place. So we get this experience of that. But it was accelerated in part by open source and the ability that these browsers came from all those sources, all the way back to those history slides where like 2 years in, we've got like 10 browsers. Like that's amazing. He like had this core concept that you could build all kinds of stuff on top of. And those people were at that time sharing and talking a lot. Then they didn't for like a dark period we call the browser wars. And then they started again recently. So we're in the good part right now, right? The third age of man where we killed Mordor and whatever, I don't know. And databases, who knows what they are underneath the web, right? Who knows what Facebook is using today? Let's hope they open source it, right? They do often. So, concluding fast, this is a picture of the 2012 Olympic Games. This is for everyone, is what that says. Can't see the this, it's off the thing. Search that, because I don't have time to tell you about it. So is it for everyone? This is the mess we've made. It's mostly English, vastly English. Most people don't speak English on the planet. Sorry if that's a newsflash. It's tied to dirt. I keep talking about this with lots of people. The internet and web live on this weird like plane above dirt, right? Above geopolitical boundaries. But you still trade licenses for content based on dirt. Well, it doesn't move on dirt. You might have gone through an email server to have that conversation that wasn't even in your country about dirt-based stuff and copyright. But like, we need new models that actually acknowledge that we don't work that way anymore. All kinds of models, maybe political. Technological, need to be accessible. Better people here to talk about that than me. And then copyright and licensing. You can't always find what the copyright or license is of a thing once you find it digitally. It's a bug in the web, and we can fix that. There's specs for that, right, Liam? Attempts at it, probably several. Author and attribution. I'll go to blogs and like read the blog. I can't find the date. I can't find who wrote it. Maybe it's just got some nickname, which is fine. I'm okay with nicknames. You can be a dog on the internet. It's okay. But I at least want it to go somewhere. I want to find like, okay, if I'm going to talk about this entity, I now know where they are, or what they are, or that they have an identifier. Publication dates, authority, ownership, they're all missing. Tim proposed a linked data system, not just documents, a graph-based data presented of relationships between the things, a borderless information space to wander, not dirt-based. On-click takes you across the web to other servers, countries. It doesn't have boundaries. The moon, interplanetary file system, look that up too. That's a thing. It's fabulous. And a worldwide note-taking system for all your knowledge to go into, right? Amazing. Okay, we have the technology. We can fix this. Clay Shirky, talked about him. I'm wrapping up quickly. So these things are all terrible. It's the whoopee cushion and joy buzzer of technology is his kind words about it. And except, of course, for all the others. It's still a heck of a lot better than all the contenders were. So the opportunity is publishing at the W3C. The IDPF and W3C are now one thing called the W3C. Just trying to make it easy. EPUB was built out of bits for the web. If you were in my talk yesterday, you know this. But it's not webby, right? And the web is built out of all kinds of things that aren't pubby, right? The distribution model is only networked, and humans aren't always networked. If you live in Cuba, somebody shows up at your house with a hard drive, and you pay them per megabyte to download the internet from last week on your hard drive and browse it until they show up again with the hard drive later. We should build technology that works for that. Like, that's okay. I'm sorry they have to do it that way, but that's okay. They're moving data. That's a network. It exists. It doesn't use TCP IP. Sorry, Vent, but it doesn't. Vent Surf, TCP IP. Combining these into web publication and then by extension, portable web publications. There's that Hugh McGuire quote again. It's awesome. Thanks.